lot of times more than with us, and that's understandable with going through a divorce, and he's really devoted to his kids and all of that. And then we started off with an inexperienced coach, and I do think Giannis had a lot to do with who we picked there, and hopefully that doesn't cost us horse going to Detroit. I think, and again, this is just statements of fact. If Doc would have been there from day one, or maybe even the coach from Golden State who Horst wanted, I think we would have had a better setup. I think this coming year, and I fully expect this to happen, we're going to be one of the favorites to win it all next year by the people in Vegas who make their decisions based on how much money they're going to make. A full year, I think definitely some changes going to have to be made. I think that we need to incorporate the younger guys in more. I think Pat C's time might be done. I think, and this is heresy to say this, but what could we get for Bobby to get the team younger and to fill in the holes? And another thing is that our window is shutting real quick here. I think next year is going to be our best chance. And my son reminded me tonight about that because I said, apparently I told him, right after we got Dame, I said, this year, this may not work, but next year we're going to be the killer team. And I think that's going to be true. I think we need to come back strong. Doc in his post-game news conference, I mean, he wants to start training camp tomorrow.
Yeah. And you know what?
There's so much stuff.
Well, I was going to say, and you know what, Dick? He wants to start training camp tomorrow. Andre Jackson Jr., Chris Livingston, A.J. Green, Marjan, they would all say, yeah, great, let's do it, which is what you're going to need.
Yeah. And, one of the things that Marcus mentioned tonight, and I wasn't aware of this, and maybe you do, Marjan has been having some injury issues all year long. Were you aware of that? He mentioned that on the TV broadcast.
He's had a couple of small things, that he's been dinged up with, and it seemed like it was really starting to pile up towards the end of the regular season. Look, is that why we saw Marjan seemingly fall out of the rotation? I don't know. Maybe it played a large role. Maybe it didn't, because I think ultimately Doc Rivers, and I suppose we should get this out of the way too, there's going to be a lot of Doc Rivers criticism, as we saw the moment the Bucks hired him, that there are the familiar memes that everybody's going to point to, and Doc Rivers this, Doc Rivers that. Everybody's going to point to the record too and say, you fired Adrian Griffin when you were 30-13. I mean, you know this, I know, and we've talked about this before. It is not that simple. The schedule was dramatically different. It was more road heavy. It was against the best teams in the league. You didn't have Chris Middleton for 16 games. There's a lot that went into it. First half versus second half. There was just no structure. And, if you're here to suggest, I'm not saying you are, if you're one of those people and you're here to suggest this series would have gone any differently if you just kept the same coach, I don't know if it would have gone 6 games.
Yeah, I don't know if we would have been the third seeded team.
Yeah,
we won against a very easy schedule.
They won with talent early in the season.
Individual talent stuck out. But when you started to go, and Doc, it was difficult. He didn't know the plays, he didn't know the players, and you come in and you expect big changes. To me, it's strictly injuries. Indiana is an 8th seed team. I mean, I just don't buy into them. They beat us, but I think there's reasons, not excuses, reasons why they did it. They got the most out of their bench. We didn't. But I don't want to take up any more of your time here. I want to thank you for a great season, putting up with all my rants and raves. But I really believe that we have a really good chance next year. And we're going to have to tweak the team a little bit, get younger if it's possible, and you keep the core. And I don't know if Beasley's going to be around, but anybody else from the original starting team, you keep all them. And I'm ready for training camp to start also. And again, thanks a lot, Justin, for putting up with me all season.
Well, thanks for listening and all the calls throughout the course of the season, Dick. There's a lot of I don't know where we even begin with the offseason, but let's closing out some of the points from Dick here. The Marjan thing, who knows if that was the reason why Marjan wasn't in the rotation, if it was just Doc is going to lean on and trust and rely on veterans. It was kind of the point I was starting to get to was it's not just Doc Rivers. Every coach is going to do that. You're going to lean on what you trust in the postseason. The young guys, their growth is going to be most important for this team. In terms of personnel decisions, there's a lot that you're going to have to address here because the reality of this is 3 straight years we've had the same type of conversation around this time last year, or the last 3 years, I should say. And that is you left the postseason earlier than you anticipated or hoped on, and you left with this same thought. We have to get younger. We have to get more athletic. We have to improve our wing play. And I don't know that you've really seen any progress there for 3 years. Now, you've added some pieces that maybe there's something there that you can really consistently develop into those pieces we're talking about. I think the biggest would be Andre Jackson Jr. and what you saw from him this season, what you saw in those postseason minutes as well. That's the guy that we're all kind of pinning our hopes on. And there's a lot to see from him where you can understand why. You thought it was going to be Marjan. It's not to say it still can't. I think you found something in A.J. Green with his defense in that it's good enough, right? It's probably better than average defense. His shooting ability as well. You are likely going to have to address the 2-guard. Malik Beasley was on a veteran's minimum contract. You don't own any rights on him. You don't have the bird rights. You're likely finding a new shooting guard. Is that A.J. Green? I don't know. Is it somebody in the draft? Is it another vet minimum deal? Is it a trade? These are all the questions that you're looking towards in this offseason here. Health is the biggest piece, and we've said it year after year after year. To win a championship, you've got to be healthy, you've got to be lucky, and you've got to be good. The Bucks had all 3 of those on their side in 2021. When you look at every other year, and look, you're going to see a lot of this chatter as well. What did the Bucks do to maximize Giannis's peak window? You won a championship in 2021. You made the conference finals, the first year of the Giannis MVP era, let's call it, in 2019. You lost in the second round in 2020. I don't know what to take from that playoffs taking place in the bubble. The Miami Heat were clearly better than the Bucks in that series. But that season, kind of similar to the back half of this season, that I've seen a lot of Bucks fans kind of chime in with this thought, too, of just how it felt. Something always felt off. And Bucks fans even saying, I'm disappointed it's over, but I'm happy it's over. That was kind of how it felt at times in the bubble, too. I mean, for a number of reasons. Everything that was going on in the world. And then you restart basketball, and you're playing at Disney World, and you're playing in the bubble, and you're playing this Heat team that, again, the similarity to that exit versus this exit was a Heat team that beat you, I believe, 2 out of 3 times in the regular season and felt like, hey, we own this team. We can beat them. Pacers beat you 4 out of 5 times. They were very confident. It was a weird year, and in many ways you were just ready for it to be over. Of players may or may not have wanted to be in the bubble, not just on the Bucks. Doc Rivers was the guy that basically had the conversation with coaches, players, everybody, one of the first nights there in that bubble setup, basically saying, guys, look, we got to do this. And from there, you went into the championship season. But the bubble season, to round off that point, Giannis wasn't healthy, at least towards the end of that series. Suffered the ankle injury. And again, you basically said, hey, Chris, we need you to go get him. You were healthy, and I know we're going to point to Giannis missing those 2 games, which is huge in the conference finals. Think back, if you can, rewind it to July, late June, July of 2021, when that happened. And if you just think about the journey you went on that day, that was Game 4. I remember we were doing pep rallies outside of the arena because that was the restart year. And we, the Bucks radio network, we were broadcasting all games from inside the arena, home or road. There were no fans at home games. The first month or so of the regular season, it was like basically Bucks employees, friends and family, 500 or so that were allowed in the arena. You gradually built it up and ramped it up to 1,000, 2,000 before it was eventually go time when you got to the postseason. You had a Christmas Day game at home in Milwaukee for the first time in decades with no real fans in the building. But we were doing all games from the arena. And man, was that interesting when you think about West Coast games that we're walking into this cavernous arena to broadcast these games at 9 o'clock at night, leaving after doing Bucks Talk, 1 in the morning, with the arena completely shut down where you feel like you're walking out of a horror movie. And I remember Game 4 being in the arena and seeing the notification there's no Trae Young, and walking out to the stage to tell Bucks fans at this pep rally, hey, Bucks are up 2-1. They got a chance to go up 3-1. And by the way, there's no Trae Young. So this is over. It's becoming a party out there. And Giannis goes down in the first half, and you lose the game. And then it immediately shifts to, what happened here? This was supposed to be a coronation of the Bucks finally breaking through and reaching the finals, and now who knows? And then you were letting that conversation sink in of, man, if they make the finals, I mean, do you even want to be there if there's no Giannis? Yes, you want to be there, but that's where you would shift to. Dante DiVincenzo, I mentioned this on the postgame too. You know, it gets lost in the shuffle when we talk about injuries. Everybody deals with them. I get it. And Doc was sure to point that out and illustrate, look, don't cry for us. Every team deals with injuries in the postseason. But for whatever reason, for the Bucks, they have been massive. You know, Giannis in those 2 games. Dante for basically the whole postseason run. I think it was Game 3 against the Heat that he went down in that first round. He missed the rest of the playoffs. That was it, right? Other than that, you were healthy. But you also had the fortunate luck of going up against the Brooklyn Nets team where James Harden went down in Game 1, 13 seconds into that series with a hamstring injury. Didn't return until I think it was Game 5, 4 or 5. Kyrie Irving goes down in Game 4. You know, that was starting to feel like what the Bucks were up against here. Where, man, this guy goes down, then this guy goes down, and then he comes back. And even before the game today, I kept finding myself thinking, man, is this just like Brooklyn? When James Harden came back, was clearly hampered by the hamstring, but he was still effective. Maybe he wasn't peak James Harden, but he was effective. Is this what we're going to get from Damian Lillard? And I think you did. You just unfortunately didn't have that supernova Kevin Durant performance next to him. 2022, as we all remember, Chris Middleton goes out with the injury. Game 2 against the Chicago Bulls, slips on a wet spot, doesn't play in the final 10 postseason games for the Bucks. Last year, as we just touched on, Giannis goes down in Game 1. For all intents and purposes, misses the first 3 games of that first-round series against the Miami Heat. And now this year. What you dealt with this year was more than any of that. No Giannis at all for those 6 games. No Dame for 2 of those games. I'll say this, and we got a lot of calls to get to, so we are going to get to every single one of you that is on hold. The Bucks, this iteration of the Bucks, this was a super team. You know, I know it's easy for us to dismiss that and say, no, it's not. It's we're the Bucks, right? We're Milwaukee. We can't be a super team. You can't have 2 of the best players in the game, 2 top 75 players, and not be a super team. The Bucks were a super team this year. And it seldom works out in the first year for super teams. That was kind of the thing you didn't really want to raise your hand and bring up all throughout the course of the season is, you know, when you get these super teams, it usually takes about a year to make those adjustments and figure things out. LeBron James didn't win a title his first year in Los Angeles. LeBron James didn't win granted, they weren't quite a super team yet, but didn't win a title his first year with the Miami Heat. Took year two. I mean, they made the finals, but they did not win the title. And that team we referenced before, the Brooklyn Nets, how many championships did they win? Period. It wasn't just first year. It doesn't tend to work out immediately. And that was the challenge of this season, is you hesitate to point out, look, next year, in all likelihood, is going to be the optimized version of this group because of the adjustment period, because of the fact that super teams take time. You throw in a new coach, and the fact that for the last 12 months, dating back to the first round last year, 4 different guys have been holding the clipboard and wearing the whistle on the sidelines for the Bucks. Bud, Adrian Griffin, Joe Prunty for 3 games in the interim process, and now Doc Rivers. So it was always going to take time. It's easier to accept and suggest that when your core is 25, 26, 27, right? Right around where they were as you were approaching that finals, as you were starting this ascent. It's an older group, and that's the challenge they're up against is, next year is probably going to be the best version, especially of that grouping of Giannis and Dame. But that's a lot of pressure on next year. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Still plenty of calls to get to. We will hear from all of you after this.
Boy, oh boy.
Spring fishing is finally here, and Fleet Farm has everything you need to reel in more fish this year. Upgrade your gear with the best brands like Rapala, Berkeley, and St. Croix. Find exclusive flicker sheds you won't find anywhere else, starting at $12.99. Get rod and reel combos starting at only $24.99. And shop our wide selection of fishing line that starts at just $4.99. Land top fishing gear and everything else you need for everyday life at Fleet Farm.
One call, that's all. It's not just a slogan, but a way of life at Gruber Law Offices. If you've been injured, call our team today. We've represented tens of thousands of injured Wisconsinites for well over 30 years. Trust Wisconsin's own Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
What do you get when you combine grilled-to-order deliciousness with only the finest Wisconsin cheeses? Cousin Sub's new Wisconsin cheese steaks, featuring either steak or chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, sautéed onions, and their new Cheddar Supreme cheese sauce. It's a match made in dairy heaven. And the decadence doesn't stop there. Pair your Wisconsin cheesesteak with their new Orange Dream Shake. All are available for a limited time only. Order in store, online, or via the mobile app. Cousin Subs. We believe in better.
ESPN Wisconsin's Mark Tauscher here, and there is one thing I think everyone can agree on. Potholes stink. And this year's weather will make it one of the worst years yet. Well, Johnson & Sons Paving is ready to take on the challenge with a team that has over 2 decades of experience. When the potholes pop up in your asphalt, Johnson & Sons Paving can patch or replace the whole area. Book an appointment now at johnsonsonspaving.com. Get that appointment booked before May 31st, and you might even see Old T on the job site for a visit. Find full contest details at ESPNWisconsinContest.com.
Discover the difference at findhigherlove.com/CBD. Higher Love Cannabis Company is the only cultivator in the UP offering organic, clean green certified products. That means quality you can trust every time. With 7 locations across the UP, including Menominee, Norway, and Ironwood, finding your higher love is easier than ever before. And for our friends in Green Bay, Higher Love is less than an hour away. Kindness starts with you. Experience Higher Love today. Visit findhigherlove.com/CBD and follow them on social media at Find Higher Love.
Welcome back to Bucks Talk.
Buck season comes to an end in Indianapolis, 120-98. I think that was the final score. It's one of those things. The season ends. You lost. It was a lot to a lot less was the final score tonight. So it's on to the offseason, and I would assume most of you don't really have takes or takeaways from what we saw tonight for those 48 minutes, and that's fine. We'll take this wherever you want to take it. Off-season checklist, what you saw from this team in the playoffs, what worked, what didn't. However you want to go with this, that is what we're here for one final time this evening. And again, until whenever. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Let's head back to the phone lines and talk with Levi in Plover. You're up next.
Oh, sweet. Hello, Justin. How are you today, man? Even though it kind of sucks about the Bucks lost.
Yeah.
But, well, I had a feeling tonight it was going to be a loss, but during the TNT talk, I saw something that's coming for the offseason that the Bucks for salary cap is like $68 million over the cap. It's like the 10th worst in the league coming into for this offseason. So I wanted to have your opinion. Like, what should they do, like for the offseason, like if they could try to make some enough cap space, or if they can to get a little younger and have to trade some of the big key pieces. Because I want to know. That's my. I just want to ask you that. So, you have a good night, my friend.
Yeah, you too. Thanks for the call. So, look, I would assume that is what most of you are going to shift this towards. And I mean, I'm fine with taking it there. We don't have a whole lot of clarity. We won't until we get deeper into the offseason, closer to the draft, is when I would assume a lot of things to pick up for the Bucks. But starting with the salary cap, I mean, look, just about all teams are over the salary cap in the league. That's the thing to really remember here. Is it's not the cap so much that you need to be cognizant of. It's the luxury tax and the aprons. So I believe there are, let's see, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I think there's about 7 teams that are actually under the cap. 7 to 8 teams that are actually under the cap. The luxury tax and the aprons are the big thing. And you've probably heard us mention second apron quite a bit this season because that was the big change with the new collective bargaining agreement. So the second apron is meant to basically level the playing field and bring in parity. It is meant to curb teams from forming super teams that we just discussed. Gone, theoretically, are going to be the days of the Brooklyn Nets trading for James Harden, trading for signing Kyrie Irving and Kevin Durant. Although we saw the Phoenix Suns basically spit in the face of that with their offseason a year ago. And earlier today, owner Matt Ishbia is saying, hey, we're in a great spot. I think 26 of the 29 other teams there would trade everything to be us. I believe the Bucks, and we can get into the details of it, but I believe the Bucks are actually going to avoid the second apron, which we did not think would be possible with the Damian Lillard contract, the Giannis contract. Giannis's contract next year is a $48+ million. Damian Lillard's deal, same thing. Both he and Giannis are on the Supermax at $48.7 million. Chris Middleton is making $31 million next year. He has a player option for $34 million the year after that. Brook Lopez is making $23 million next year. And that is it for him. He is a free agent after that. Bobby Portis is making $12.5 million next year, and that has a player option for $13 million the year after. And Pat Connaughton is making $9.4 million and has a player option for $9.4 million the year after that. So, looking at this roster, what you know is the group is intact for next season. The free agents that you have to make a decision on are Marjon Beauchamp, and his cap hold is going to be about $2 to $3 million. Jay Crowder and Malik Beasley. Pat Beverly is a free agent as well, and Thanasis. Those are your free agents for next year. A.J. Green and Andre Jackson Jr. have their rookie scale deals that you can pick up. I would assume the Bucks do. Same story for Chris Livingston, and Danilo Gallinari, for that matter, is also a free agent. So of the core, Giannis, Dame, Chris, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, Marjan Beauchamp. I think I said he was a free agent. He is not. Of that group, you have all of them under contract for next season. It's Jay Crowder, Malik Beasley, Pat Beverly. It's the vets. Those guys, the bench, is, I think, what we would all agree you need to reshape. Now, I mentioned the Bucks very likely to avoid the second apron. What the second apron means, we can get into that a little bit later, but the Bucks are likely to avoid it because they lost tonight. So reaching the second round would have triggered bonuses for Chris Middleton, and because he is not going to get those, the Bucks are going to come up just short. The last I checked here, they're going to fall short of the second apron by just under $600,000. That is as close as it gets. As of this moment, projecting all the guys that they have under contract for next season, they're about $5 million under that second apron level. But again, remember, that is just with Giannis, Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez, Bobby Portis, Pat Connaughton, and Marjan Beauchamp under contract. 7 guys. So you're under the second apron level for next season, but you're not going to stay there once you get into July and rounding out this roster. So what that means is it gives you more wiggle room and leeway to do things this offseason. That is going to be gone next offseason. So it puts even more importance on striking the right moves and finding the right pieces this offseason. The second apron, if you are in that, you cannot aggregate contracts in a trade. So in other words, we mentioned all those contract figures. This is not me saying any of these guys should be traded and yada, yada, yada. With that disclaimer out of the way, if you are in the second apron, you could not say, okay, we are going to package Pat Connaughton and Bobby Portis. That would put us at about $22 million in contracts going out. We're going to package that, and we're going to trade it for a player that's making $20 million or 22 or 23, because you can take back 115% in trades. If you're in the second apron, you can't do that. It is 1 for 1. You can trade one guy that is making $22 million and bring in a guy that is making $22 million. It limits the amount you can bring back as well. So, as I said, most cases you can trade and you can bring back 125% of that value. If you're in the second apron, it shrinks it down to, I think, 110%, 115%. So cuts the dollars you can bring in. It restricts you on ways you can bring in those dollars. You can't group up contracts. You got to do those 1-for-1s, or you can trade one and bring back smaller pieces. You can't send out cash, so we see this a lot at the draft. As we've mentioned, you'd like to get younger. You'd like to get more athletic. Well, how do you do that? You'll see a lot of teams trading cash for a second-round pick or a late first-round pick. You can't do that if you're in the second apron. So there's just a lot of these things. It removes exceptions. So that's the other piece. As I mentioned, the Bucks, if you're in the second apron, all you have at your disposal is the veteran minimum contract. So that's what you got Malik Beasley on this year. So just over $2 million. That's all you got. That's how the Phoenix Suns filled out their roster. When you think about all those vets that they brought in, veteran minimum deals, Eric Gordon, that's all you would have. The Bucks would have one of their exceptions. I think it is the taxpayer mid-level that they would have at their disposal to use. I understand this is maybe way too advanced and nuanced for a lot of you. Maybe some of you don't care about it, but basically it means, hey, you have a $6 million trading chip you have that you can use to sign somebody. So that's important, and that may be ultimately the silver lining of, look, disappointing end to it, but it gives us a little more leeway to do some things. And as we saw throughout the course of this season and this series, the Bucks need to do some things. You know, we can point back to tonight in the bench production. It was there all season long. And look, I said this during the regular season a couple of times too. It's a top-heavy team. When you trade for Damian Lillard, you're not expecting your bench to be a productive bench in terms of scoring. You need that productivity elsewhere, right? They have to be productive defensively. Think back to the early days of Bud when the Bucks were on this ascent as one of the better teams in the league. Their bench, their productivity was defense and not giving up the lead. It was never scoring. I mean, the last time the Bucks had a real scorer off the bench, Bobby Portis, but before that, it was Greg Monroe. But you need some of that, right? You can't keep going through these stretches where the bench for the opponent is outscoring you 40-10. And tonight it was 50-10, I think. Tonight it was 41 for McConnell and Obi Toppin. But athleticism, that's the big thing. And what the Bucks choose to do with that first-round pick this summer is going to be very interesting to me as well, because they can trade it. They can trade it on draft night. But do you need to keep it? As we said, you need to get younger. You need to get more athletic. They have a pick swap with the Pelicans this year, and they finished 2 to 3 picks apart. They owe their first-round pick next year. And by way of other deals, it is going to the New York Knicks. They have a pick swap with the Pelicans once again in 2026. So if the wheels fall off, and remember, that would be after this upcoming season, when I mentioned Chris Middleton's in a walk year, he can decline his player option. Same for Bobby Portis, same for Pat Connaughton. Brooke Lopez comes off the books as well. And then you go into that draft. And they have a pick swap with the Pelicans. 2027 first-round pick. That goes to the New Orleans Pelicans as part of the Drew Holiday trade. And then you're done. Then you finally conveyed everything in that deal for Drew Holiday. 2028, you have a pick swap with the Portland Trailblazers from the Damian Lillard trade. And that is after those deals have come up. So it's going to be interesting to see where the team is at then. 2029, your first-round pick goes to the Blazers. And in 2030, you once again have a pick swap with the Portland Trailblazers. So you don't control your first-round assets. All of them have full control of it, I should say, until 2031. 7 drafts from now. It's not that you don't have first-round picks. There's 3 years in between now and then where you will not have a first-round pick. So that puts even more importance on hitting it with that pick, whether it is finding a player that you can develop and become a part of your rotation or in a trade. If it's taking one of those contracts, adding maybe a younger player, adding a first-round pick, trading it out for 1 or 2 pieces that you know can help you now. But that's going to be, I think, the first big date to circle on the calendar that week in the NBA draft. What the Bucks decide to do with that first-round pick. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Let's squeeze in one more call here before the break. Joe in Madison, you're up next.
Hey, Justin. I have a question. So who do you think the Bucks should get? Because we obviously need to address the 2-guard position. Do you believe that we should stick with AJ Green? And then also, who was the Bucks' backup point guard this year?
For all intents and purposes, for a large part of the season, it was Chris Middleton. But your backup point guard was Campaign early in the season. It was Pat Beverly, and then it became you were playing both of your point guards together. But, that was the other big question coming into the season was what are they going to do at point guard here? Because it wasn't until just before the season started, you get Damian Lillard and you bring in Campaign. But before that, it was, man, what are the Bucks doing at point guard here? And that was, I would assume this is part of your point or what you were getting at. That was one of the things that stood out was the challenges the Bucks had bringing the ball up the floor and organizing the offense. Damian Lillard does that. It's not to take away from that. But the way the Pacers pressured the Bucks in this series, you should not be able to do that. Chris Middleton can run an offense. I'm not in the, man, Chris can't handle the ball and Chris is a turnover machine, but Chris Middleton is still not a point guard. You feel comfortable with him handling the ball and running things, but he's not a point guard. And what the Pacers were able to do, again, it kind of had to do with the Bucks not really having a true ball handling point guard out there at large portions of this series when Dame went down, but also an older group that needed an influx of youth. I don't think it is coincidental that we saw Andre Jackson Jr. is the only guy that was unfazed by that pressure from the Pacers in the backcourt, being picked up 94 feet and being really the only guy that was consistently able to get the ball across midcourt without the Bucks coming close to an 8-second violation. But I think the big takeaway is, what we've said. It's the same conversation we've had for, this will be the third offseason now. You have to get younger. You have to get more athletic. But that is going to be the challenge. And finding that balance is, it's easy for us to say, hey, you got to get younger. I mean, there's merit to that. You need some youth injected into this group. But you're also Damian Lillard, Giannis, Chris Middleton, Brook Lopez. As of this moment, you have those guys. You're a veteran group, so you're not just going to turn over the keys and say, all right, we need half young guys, half old guys. We can point to the Golden State Warriors and say, well, they tried it with the two timelines. It's hard to say the two timelines per se did not work out because the Warriors did get a second championship, an unexpected championship in 2022. The year that the Bucks season, I think that year more than anyone is what you would point to and say, man, they really could have had a second title. The way that team was playing, Chris goes down. Warriors got a second title, but other than that, how do the two timelines work out for them? Trying to figure out the young guys. And part of it is you got to get the right young guys. James Wiseman was not. Moses Moody and Jonathan Kuminga, they look like good players, nice players. Not what you would hope for at the level or at the number the Warriors were picking at. So that's the other challenge of it. It's going to be big for Andre Jackson Jr., A.J. Green, and every young guy you have. To me, look, we didn't see a whole lot of him, but I am very intrigued by Chris Livingston. And I suppose we should have the caveat. It is not to suggest Chris Livingston is all of a sudden going to be a starter for you and playing heavy minutes. But I am very curious to see what you have there because of all those things we mentioned. You need athleticism. I mean, underline it, put it in bold, write it 10 times. You need more athleticism, and that stood out more than anything in this series with the Pacers. When you look at the pace these two teams are playing at, and you look at how much slower the Bucks looked without Giannis on the floor. You need athleticism, and you would love to have that on the wing. Chris Livingston has that. So that's one piece. I don't know if you'd say it's a project. It's certainly not a one-year thing. It's going to take time. But I'm curious to see what you can develop from him. But in terms of the here and now, AJ and Andre are the two guys that you think we've seen extended stretches of. We think there's something there that we can continue to develop. Now, in terms of free agents, again, the Bucks are going to have the taxpayer exception. I believe, as we just went through some of those numbers, I think they're going to narrowly miss the second apron. So they should have the taxpayer mid-level, which typically around $6-7 million, I believe, that you can use to sign a player. But that's the other piece. You got to hit it on that. Now, I suppose it's worth pouring over. I don't, frankly, remember who else was out there when we talk about the Bucks needing to find more young, athletic wings. That's probably going to be your best route, that or a trade, which you can do, avoiding the second apron. But we had these conversations of you need to find some of that. And the Bucks had doubled down on vets. And again, you can understand why with a group that's already older. But your mid-level 2 years ago was Joe Ingles. He gave you value. didn't check those boxes that we talked about of younger, athletic wings to help you push the pace. So that's going to be curious to see as well what the Bucs do with that, how they choose to use that. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucs Talk. Still a lot of calls trickling in. We will continue to get to those after this on Bucs Talk.
This is Bucs Talk, presented by Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
From big tailgate parties to cozy dinners for two, the freshest ideas start with a stop at Century Foods. Now through Wednesday, save on 8.8 to 12-ounce selected varieties Kellogg's Kids cereal, 2 for $6. 6 to 24-ounce selected varieties Frito-Lay party-sized chips or dips, 2 for $9. 12-pack cans selected varieties Super Chill Soda, $4.49. 64-ounce selected varieties Old Orchard Juice, 2 for $5.
Why'd you throw my glass across the room?
I have to keep practicing.
The vase from Aunt Sophie?
I'm warming up in case I get to take them out at American Family Field. Read this.
Win the ultimate baseball fan experience at Century Foods?
You either get to throw out the first pitch, hold the finish line for the famous racing sausages, or be on the field during batting practice. My new TV!
Just doing a little batting practice of my own.
The ultimate baseball fan experience. Return the entry form found in the weekly ad to any Century by July 24th.
No young person should ever have to worry about having a safe place to sleep at night, or a warm meal to eat, or whether anyone cares about them.
But the reality is, 1 in 10 young adults will experience a form of homelessness this year.
But the good news is, there's an organization making a big difference. Covenant House.
For over 50 years, Covenant House has been helping youth in crisis and giving them the support and the tools they need to succeed in life.
I have no words to express how Covenant House changed my life. They just really genuinely just wanted to help me succeed, and I'm succeeding.
When youth who are experiencing homelessness have a hot meal, a safe place to sleep, and love, most of all love, they can overcome heartbreaking challenges, and their lives are transformed.
Covenant House is changing the lives of young people in cities across America.
To learn more, go to covenanthouse.org today. Thank you for caring.
Tom has been a teacher for over 40 years. One day, I think one of the students had asked the question and he didn't remember the answer. And I also noticed that he was letting his class out earlier than they were supposed to let out. I was really starting to worry.
Levi and I talked about how it would change our lives, but he was there beside me.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
This is Bucs Talk.
Bucs season comes to an end tonight in the first round. It is the second consecutive year we're having this conversation this early. The Indiana Pacers, their youth, their athleticism, and tonight, their bench, Obi Toppin and T.J. McConnell, too much for the Bucs to overcome. 855-616-1620 is the number to join us tonight on the show. Still a handful of calls trickling in. As I said, we're going to get to every single call that comes in tonight, since this is our last chance to gather in this setting until October. But we will get to every single call that comes in, so long as you're willing to wait on hold. And any text that comes in as well, as I see a few coming in here now. Am I disappointed? Absolutely. Am I surprised? No. This team was never consistent enough to be a serious contender. Reload around Giannis, Dame, and Chris. And I do think, as that comes to us, I believe, from the Madison area, I think that's probably the feeling of a lot of Bucs fans. You were disappointed. I talked about it with some people in Indianapolis before this series began, when they asked me about what's the mindset. And I asked them, what's the confidence level for Pacers fans? Because it seems like everyone that I talk to and hear from, they assume they're going to win this series. And when I was asked, what's the outlook for Bucs fans, it seemed like, I don't really know. This is the least confident Bucs fans have been going into the postseason since they started to put themselves in that conversation as one of the elites in the league. You can get why. This team had been inconsistent all season long, But also, oh, by the way, Giannis is injured, and we didn't know what his status would be for this series. As it turned out, his status was none, unavailable. But it just seemed like because of that, because the year was very up and down, you didn't know about Giannis, it just seemed like a lot of fans were of the mindset of, I'm going to be disappointed if this ends in the first round, but I kind of expect it. To that point, from the 414, glad the Bucks are over for 23-24. Team with issues starting at the top. Lame management that doesn't understand the NBA and lazy overpaid players. Glad I didn't pay for an overpriced ticket for that fiasco. Was that from you, Max?
One from me.
Okay, that is certainly a stance. You can't fire Doc Rivers this offseason. Was anyone suggesting they would? Why would you pay 4 coaches next season? Firing Doc is not the move. Reload, give it one more go, then reassess. I mean, yeah, Doc Rivers is not getting fired. The only way Doc Rivers is not the coach of the Bucks next year is if Doc Rivers decides, you know what, I'm good with coaching. I would assume the Bucks are just going to be paying 2 head coaches next year. Because I got to believe Mike Budenholzer is getting a job. And as we always say, where there's smoke, there's fire. Boy, I don't know if Frank Vogel is going to be in Phoenix long. And I said from the start, man, the Cavs make a lot of sense to me for Bud. So do the Phoenix Suns, especially given Bud is an Arizona guy. So that is going to be interesting. But one way or another, I got to believe Mike Budenholzer is on the sidelines somewhere next season. So that's another silver lining. Bucks are paying 1 fewer head coach next season, we believe. 855-616-1620 is the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Let's head back to the phone lines here and talk with Randy in Belgium. You're up next.
Hey, Justin. Thanks for taking my call. I'm pretty sure you said these 3 fellas are still under contract for next year, but in your opinion, do you think Bobby, Chris, and Brooke are going to be back next year? And then also, I was wondering, why was Jay Crowder it seems to me he didn't play last year in the Miami series, and he was kind of a no-show here again, in this first round. So those are my questions. I'll just listen to your response. Thanks again.
Yeah, thanks for the call. It was a tough series for Jay Crowder, and I don't know that Jay Crowder ever really looked the same after that injury that we touched on early in the season, which was the only injury the Bucks had to deal with. For the most part, injury, yes. I mean, it was really the only absence the Bucks had to deal with in that first half of the season. He's a 3-and-D player, known for that. 3-pointers in defense. But the peak of Jay Crowder was probably the bubble when he was a menace against the Bucks with the Miami Heat. He started for the Suns in that final series, had some moments there. He's another one of those vets, though. And a core injury is a big part of it. The age is a big part of it. And as Doc Rivers has said many times, and again, I feel like I cannot overstate, Doc Rivers is not alone here. This is the mindset of most head coaches. Your rotations get smaller and smaller and smaller. Bucks are basically 7 deep tonight. Now, no Giannis changes that. But they basically played 7 deep. You find what works, what you trust, and you stick with that. And that's how you're going to lose. If we're going to go out, we're going out with this. Jay Crowder just wasn't one of those pieces for Doc Rivers. Wasn't last year either, as you pointed to in that series with Miami Heat. I mean, I suppose that's the one you could point to more and say, well, could we have tried something on Jimmy Butler? Maybe Jay. We saw a couple of Jay minutes against Jimmy Butler. From what I recall, it wasn't great. Nobody was, in fairness to Jay Crowder. But he's one of those pieces that we talked about with the bench. If it's not scoring, you just need that consistent, reliable defense. I think more than anything, you need playmaking. You need youth. You need playmaking. That's the big piece. You need something to keep the offense moving. The last question that you had, look, I don't particularly like to get into the conjecture business, especially when it comes to players' jobs. I mean, I would be stunned if Chris Middleton is not a part of this team next year. I mean, if for no other reason than you saw the value through these 6 games. You saw he can still give you that. Now, it's a year older, and again, that's going to be the challenge of everything here. But there's also the connection to Giannis. And I think you saw a glimpse at how it makes sense with those 3 guys. The big thing is, how do we keep him healthy? And I suppose one of the conversations, once we get to see this roster laid out, which we are months away from, but I suppose one of the bigger conversations should be, hey, look at what Miami does. Maybe that's what the Bucks need to do. Fans aren't going to like it in the regular season, but if it's 3 straight years of this, well, maybe that's what we need to do. If Giannis, I think we're going to need you to play 67 games. 66. We're going to need you below that threshold even. Let's just make sure you're healthy for the playoffs. The other ones, who's to say? I don't know. I think those are going to be the names that you hear brought up the most. Brook Lopez and Bobby Portis. Because it's not just, it's not like it's an indictment on their playing. I think the big thing is when you look at the contract size, you're going to look at 3 names. Those 2 guys and Pat Connaughton. Because those are the guys you have on the bench or not Giannis, Dame, and Chris that make the most money that could bring back the most in terms of contracts. The other part of it is Bobby Portis is due for an extension this offseason. So it's a matter of where this thing goes. You could extend him, maybe save some money on that, and keep kicking the can down the road with this squad. Where then you're all of a sudden looking at the 25-26 season where you know, okay, we got Giannis under contract, we got Dame under contract, we theoretically have those young guys under contract. Maybe you use your taxpayer mid-level and you sign somebody on a 2-year, $14 million deal, something like that. We got that person under contract. And we got Bobby, if you do an extension with Bobby Portis. I should say he's up for an extension, not due an extension. Brook Lopez being an expiring contract to me is the most interesting part. Because when you look at the age of Brook Lopez and however many years removed from a back injury and surgery he is, Brook Lopez, I think a lot of times I've talked about Chris Middleton's value and the perceived value among Bucks fans, the lack of respect that I think he gets a lot of times. Brook Lopez is almost similar to that because I think it's easy to look at the end of the play and say, man, Brook Lopez stinks. Brook Lopez was he's getting beat. You can't play him. And to be fair, there is some merit to where this league has shifted. You don't see quite as much of the traditional bigs, and especially aging ones like Brook Lopez is now. I don't mean aging to be disrespectful. We're all aging, right? Brook Lopez is younger than me, but it goes against what we said you need to get. I mean, Brook Lopez I thought was very good in this series, but Brook Lopez is going to look bad if there's no point of attack defense and you're saying, hey, Brook, we need you to stop that person that's driving at you, and we also need to stop the guy that's behind you. It's an impossible task. So I think that was the big piece is, man, you saw when he had Drew Holiday with him, he was still just as good as ever. I think he was still very good this season. But if you ask me who would be most likely, where would it be most likely to see something happen? As uncomfortable as the conversation is for me to have, I suppose I would say that. But that's going to be some of the interesting pieces to this group is Last year, going into it, it was the, man, you're going to hear all the chatter of, well, the Giannis watch is on, and how much longer is Giannis going to stay in Milwaukee? Well, you answer that question. And you brought in Damian Lillard, and same with Chris Middleton. And look, here's the other thing. Well, you should have traded Chris instead of Drew. You couldn't have done that, right? Chris was a free agent. You're, of course, going to sign him. I know we had that conversation last year, but you can't just say, okay, we're going to let Chris walk and we're going to sign somebody else that, number one, isn't there, but also you don't have cap room to do it. You can go over the cap to sign your own guys. You can't sign others when you're over the cap. But that piece is at least out of the way, where you know Giannis is here, Dame is here, Chris Middleton is here. And here's the other thing. I feel pretty confident in saying this based on some things that I've heard, but don't pay attention to the Damian Lillard is miserable here. Dame's going to ask for a trade, and he's not going to be here next year. There is no truth to it. As Dick went through, and we've kind of tiptoed around throughout this season, there's a lot that was going on for Damian Lillard. And I'm sure in many ways, it's not speaking to the character or competitiveness of Damian Lillard. I'm sure in many ways a part of Damian Lillard is happy that this season is over now too. It was a whirlwind. He was traded a week before training camp began, going through some things off the court, away from his family, having to go back and forth and deal with things. This was a lot for Dame too. So I think in many ways you just need that reset. All right, let's regroup. I know we said this last year, and that's the other thing. Giannis had the tweet last year. I hope he doesn't do it this year because he's going to get mocked and ridiculed if he does. But there was a lot that was out of everyone's control. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. I don't know if I answered your question, by the way, so if not, feel free to text in. I mentioned that text about the Doc slander or question about firing him. My previous comment deals with paying out prior contracts of prior deals. Aren't we going to owe money in 2024-25 for Bud and the Griffin deals? Yes. They're going to owe money for both of those guys unless they get a head coaching job or a job that would offset it. As I said, I would assume Bud is going to get a job next year. So we'll see. But, yeah, it's a lot of money going out on the coaching staff for the Bucks. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Let's squeeze in one more here before we take another break. Let's talk with Jim in Milwaukee. You're up next.
Hey, Justin. How are you tonight?
Good. How are you?
Good. All things considered, I guess. Hey, I just want to thank you for keeping us informed and keeping it interesting this year, and especially tonight. I was kind of thinking the Bucks would look a lot different next year, but sounds like the core is going to be there, so that's not the case. But that wasn't really called to talk about. I just wanted to talk about what a great announcer we have on the radio. This year, I ended up spending more time, it seemed, in the car listening to the Bucks than watching the Bucks on TV, and I really got to, enjoy and appreciate David Kane. Just love the way he calls the games, the way he describes it, the stats and things he puts up to back things up or to expand on it. And then every once in a while he throws out a great phrase. And I would have to say my favorite of the year was in the playoffs, the shot clock was winding down, and Dame dumped it off to Lopez, and Lopez shot and missed. And the way he described it was Dame tossed a hand grenade to Lopez. I thought that was a great phase, and I just really, really enjoy the way he calls a game.
I told him to say that, so you're welcome. What if I told you he's a jerk in real life?
I don't have to deal with him in real life. I don't have to deal with him in basketball. But I'd say that surprises me. Because usually the jerk will come out in the broadcast.
Yeah, I mean, that is, well, you'd be surprised. You don't always catch it, but no, that is definitely not the case.
True. Right. Some people can do well at hiding that. But I think he's great. Like I said, I listened to more this year than I ever had before, and surely love the way he calls the game. And I'm almost starting to prefer it to the TV, I would say.
We are very lucky to have him. He is very, very good. I would agree with you there. In terms of the other things that you brought up, look, the core, I do think the core is going to stay the same with those three guys. What happens beyond that, I don't know. I think you lost in the first round 2 years in a row. There's a lot more you can point to this year, and I think the tricky part is, I forget how she phrased this, but Camille Davis, who I work with on Locked On Bucks, had mentioned when we talk about 3 years in a row of injuries really telling the story, unfortunately, for the Bucks in the postseason. There's a fine line between excuses and reasons. I mean, excuses and explanations, I should say. Like, what? How do you decipher which was which? I mean, there's certainly something to it with the injuries, but you can't keep going back to the same thing. I mean, it's like the definition of insanity when it's 3 years in a row that we're pointing at this. Okay, why is this happening then? And sometimes it's just luck, right? Who saw Chris Middleton slipping on a wet spot? Maybe the Bucks signed a deal with the devil, as I've seen many point out, to win a championship in 2021. Because look what's happened after that. But to me, I think if you lose 2 years in a row in the first round, even if you can point to all the obvious, you didn't have Giannis for the full series, you didn't have Dame for 2 games, you changed a coach midway through the season, you never really got to develop that chemistry and find consistency and continuity with this group, and especially with Damian Lillard and Giannis. I think having said that, this team's goals are much, much higher than making the playoffs. So I would assume, I'm not going to say nothing, but just about nothing. Nothing is off the table when talking about how you shape this roster. I don't think that includes Giannis. I don't think it includes Damian Lillard. I don't think it includes Chris Middleton. It certainly doesn't include a coaching change. But outside of that, I don't know that you could rule out anything as this team looks to start to pivot and find a way of, okay, how do we extend this shelf life? Giannis is still at his peak, in his prime, but that is starting to fade. It's not to say Giannis isn't good anymore. That's not what I'm saying. It's the age, and it's the fact that that's a pretty serious injury that Giannis suffered. Thankfully, as we mentioned on the radio broadcast, thankfully, you avoided the absolute doomsday scenario, and that was a Giannis return where something goes catastrophically wrong. A ruptured Achilles or something. Same with Damian Lillard. If that were to happen, then nothing is off the table. Then you really have to re-examine. Need John Horst to stay, a text comes in. And look, that's the other interesting part to keep an eye on. Is we saw John Horst linked, I should say, reports linked John Horst. We don't know that John Horst is actually linked to it, but reports suggesting, hey, the Pistons could look at John Horst. And in offseason, that's going to be important as you try to retool here and figure out how do we extend this. We know we got Giannis and Dame's contract situations, but we need to build pieces around that to keep us at that level. Are you sure our money situation is that good? Well, that's great. Let's start camp ASAP. That's from Dick. Yes. And Bobby Marks of ESPN basically confirmed that they are, by his projections, actually more than that. I think this is including some other bonuses was the number that I saw. But yes, they are expected to be under the second apron this offseason. They will not be once we get to July and they round out the roster. So for next league season, they will not be under that second apron. So that's when those penalties are going to start to kick in. So the following offseason or at the trade deadline, you're not going to be able to aggregate deals in a trade. Your picks are going to start to get frozen, your first-round picks, and you could say, well, who cares? We don't have any. But it just kicks the can down the road further. So once you do have that pick 7 years out, which is when the Bucks would own their first-round pick, 7 years out, it freezes. And the only way to unfreeze that pick is 2 consecutive years getting under the second apron, which basically is to say the only way to unfreeze your pick is to take a step backwards. Because the only way to get under the second apron, if you're already in it, is to shed some money and presumably become a worse team. So this, in many ways, could be, and I know I said this last year, I wasn't alone, but this offseason, in many ways, is probably the last big push with this group. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. More calls to hear from. We will get to all of you after this.
This is Bucks Talk, presented by Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
Hey, this is Jen Latta. You're listening to 94.5 ESPN, WKTI, and WKTI HD Milwaukee.
A locally owned Good Karma brand station.
Do you have a car, boat, ATV, or motorcycle taking up space in storage or your garage? Homer here, asking you to consider donating it to Rawhide Youth Services. Co-founded in 1965 by Bart and Jerry Starr, Rawhide is a local faith-based nonprofit organization dedicated to inspiring and equipping at-risk youth and their families. They need vehicle donations to support their mission of helping troubled youths transform their lives. Visit rawhide.org/donate and learn how you can help today.
Looking for a totally rad flavor adventure, brochachos? Look no further than Surfer Boy Pizza as seen in Stranger Things. Each mouth-watering variety contains rich tomato sauce, delicious mozzarella cheese, and a gnarly range of toppings. The crust is crispy on the outside and airy on the inside. You'll think it was hand-tossed by the Surfer Boy Pizza dudes themselves. Look for it in the freezer aisle at your local store and buckle up your taste buds with Surfer Boy Pizza.
Donors choose. Support a classroom. Build a future.
Did you know that every year, public school teachers spend nearly $500 of their own money for student supplies? Let's do the math. That comes out to over $1.2 billion a year. And that's just not right. At Donors Choose, we want students and teachers to have the tools they need for a great education. And now, more than ever, they need your help. Here's what you can do. Go to DonorsChoose.org and choose from teachers' requests that support reading, math, science, history, and more. Once a request is funded, we'll take care of shipping everything directly to the teacher. It's that easy. You'll receive thank you letters and photos from students and teachers and a report of how every dollar was spent. Teachers' needs have never been greater. Learn more at DonorsChoose.org.
Donors choose. Support a classroom. Build a future.
My mother was always very active and independent, and she was familiar with her neighborhood. But one day, she stopped at the stop sign for much longer than usual. She wasn't even really sure where she was at.
It's important for you to talk to someone about it. I felt so much better after my son told me, Mom, we'll figure it out.
When something feels different, it could be Alzheimer's. Now is the time to talk. Visit alz.org/ourstories to learn more. A message from the Alzheimer's Association and the Ad Council.
Welcome back to Bucks Talk.
On to the offseason, and an offseason that certainly figures to be interesting. I don't expect a Damian Lillard-esque splash for the Bucks, but you got a first-round draft pick. You're going to avoid the second apron, which is huge for this offseason. But you feel pretty good about that trio of Giannis, Dame, and Chris Middleton, and especially what you saw from Chris in this series. Is that to suggest, hey, you're going to get the exact same thing from Chris Middleton next year? Maybe not. But what helps Chris Middleton more than anything is the fact that he is now your third guy versus the number 2 guy, the guy that has to carry the half-court offense, assuming you can stay healthy. Everything else, who knows? As we just went through the contract situations, I think it's 7 players you have under contract. Most of the free agents, all of the free agents for that matter, are the vets and the guys that were coming off the bench or starting late in the season. Pat Beverly, Jay Crowder, Danilo Gallinari. That's the type of free agents that you have. So that's the good piece. When last year there was, you got all these pieces. You got Chris Middleton. You got Pat Connaughton. What is it going to mean for Giannis? So it's not to say it won't be an offseason full of change, but I don't know that it's going to be quite to the levels we saw a year ago. 855-616-1620 is the number to join us tonight, whether you're listening in Milwaukee on our flagship WTMJ or in Madison on ESPN Madison, and a handful of texts still coming in as well. We'll get to all of those in just a moment. Let's head back to the phone lines and check in with Shu in North Carolina. You're up next.
Hey, Justin, man, how you doing?
Good.
So I got a couple things I want to get off since it's going to be your last show for the year. My thing is, what happened to the minutes for Andre Jackson, and what does Doc Rivers have against young players or getting them ready for the postseason? Because I feel like the Pacers were a young team that struggled and got ready for the postseason, and a lot of our young players were on the bench. And we have to get younger in the front court because Bobby and Brook Lopez could not guard Siakam or Miles Turner when they was on the perimeter. They was too scared of the blow-by, so they was giving up a lot of open threes. And do you think John Horst's job should be on the line just due to the past, 5 years and the decisions like giving away Dante DiVincenzo or giving up 5 picks for Crowder, bringing back Pat Connaughton? I looked up Pat Connaughton's stats, and he hasn't averaged no more than 11 points in the playoffs. And that was just 1 year. He averaged 7 points as a player in the playoffs, and we keep bringing him back as a role player. Meanwhile, there's other role players like Kelly Oubre, and, there's just one. I can't think of them all, but I feel like he needs to do a better job of getting young and athletic because, as you can see, you got the Thunder, you got the Pacers, you got the Timberwolves. The young players are taking over the NBA, so he has to start moving more in that direction. And, yeah, that's pretty much it.
Well, look.
So I would like.
Yeah, thanks for the call, Shu. I'm not going to dispute that they need to get more athletic on the perimeter, especially. Front court, sure, there's some merit to that. I think it's hard to say, man, they need. You have to point this out. You can't mention one without the other. Did Bobby Portis and Brook Lopez struggle defending on the perimeter? Sure. That's also not their strength. That's not what they're out there for. And Pascal Siakam got going early in the series. I thought Bobby Portis did a pretty good job as the series progressed on him. Brook Lopez, again, I thought he did what he was asked to do. I said it. There's two things that I really struggle with and hesitate to do. For the obvious reason of my connection to the team and the awkwardness of suggesting, hey, you got to trade this player, you got to trade that player, you got to cut this player. You're never going to hear me say that. Maybe it's a cop out, maybe it's not what you want to hear, but it's just not what I'm going to do. The other one is, really, really digging in and criticizing coaching and schemes for the most part, because there are some times where it's pretty evident and apparent of this worked, this didn't. I mean, you heard me on another platform today talk about Doc Rivers' strengths and the fact that, look, I know there was a lot of LOL Bucks when they hired Doc Rivers because of the playoff track record and the 3-1. Man, if for no other reason than for Doc Rivers to win a series trailing 3-1, you really wanted this, to extend this to Milwaukee and win this first-round series, even without Giannis. Even if it meant you're not going to have Giannis for the full playoffs, who cares? Just let Doc Rivers get this. But look, the reality is this. I point this out every time someone will ask about assistant coaches. And we got a text too asking about Darvin Ham. We'll get to that in a second. But every time somebody asks about assistants, who are the assistant coaches you need to hire? Or what? Who are the best assistants? We don't know. You can look at Brook Lopez getting beat on a play by Andrew Nembhard, for example. What was Brook Lopez supposed to do on that play? Do you know? Or did we just see the tail end of Andrew Nemhard beating him into the paint and scoring. Was somebody supposed to contain? Was Brook Lopez supposed to be up more? Was Brook Lopez supposed to be back in the drop, protecting the paint? We don't know. We can assume. Sometimes you do know. Sometimes you can piece it together and say, well, here's what the Bucks do. We've heard Doc Rivers say this. And Doc Rivers, frankly, will candidly tell you after the game what was supposed to happen. But we don't know. And especially with schemes and coaches, you don't know what was called. Right? You don't know what the responsibility of each of those guys was. And it's no different with assistant coaches. Right? Everybody loved Charles Lee. I'm not saying Charles Lee was bad. We don't know what Charles Lee was responsible for. The Bucks had a very good staff, and I think that is notable. And I think they have one now. It was an untested, unexperienced staff to start the season. And I think there was frustration there. You can't say the same now. I don't see any real wholesale changes. I'm sure there will be some thinning of the bench. Doc has alluded to that quite a bit. It's a lot. They got a lot of assistants, right? When he inherited a family and he brought his guys with him too. 3 assistants along the way that Doc brought in. But it is a good staff now. I truly believe that. When you hear from some of these guys, when you see their proven track record. Dave Yeager was a head coach. Rex Kalamian is a guy that Doc Rivers has talked about detailing defenses, right? You know that. But early in the season, when people ask me about their staff, I don't know. Like, how good is Patrick Mutombo? I don't know. I don't know what he's responsible for. Maybe on a given day you'll know. You know which guys had the scout. You'll see guys working with specific coaches. You'll hear somebody talking about something that they worked on. So on those individual bases, yeah, I know that they did that. But by and large, we have no idea. Right? This isn't the NFL. That's their offensive coordinator. Now, there is some of that with Rex and with Dave Yeager, but not with the rest of these guys. It's not, this guy runs the defense. This guy runs the offense. This guy works with the point guards. So there's a lot of ambiguity. And that's really, to me, at times what can be difficult. When I'm not criticizing you guys. I get the knee-jerk reaction. I get the fan reaction. But it's not always as simple as seeing what your eyes tell you, this guy stinks, or this guy blew the play. It's not always the case. Go back a couple of games ago. Doc Rivers talked about this specifically in Game 3. When you looked at some of those rebounding issues the Bucks were having, and you thought, man, Bobby's not having a great game. And after the game, Doc was, I got to review the film. I'm not sure. My initial reaction was, I liked what Bobby did. I think our guards put him in a bad spot, or our guards didn't do this. Then when we caught up with Doc Rivers again a couple of days later before Game 4, he doubled down on that. Yeah, I thought Bobby did a good job. We just didn't help him out with our guards. So that's the other thing, is just keep that in mind, that we just don't know. You're not the one calling the plays. You don't know what the set was. You don't know what the responsibility was. For the most part, some of you may. But it's not always as simple as watching the end result and saying, man, this guy screwed up because his guy beat him. Same in football, certainly. Same in any sport. But in this one especially, it's extra difficult because of how ambiguous assistant coaching is. Player personnel, same thing. I'll tell you how much public information guys are making, what their contract term and length is, who's a free agent. I mean, I'm not going to say the Bucks need to trade this player. They need to trade this player. I'm done with this player. I don't know what to expect in this offseason. Is a long story short. I don't expect any knee-jerk reactions here. I do think, again, it depends on how you choose to view this. You could say, we can't have this conversation year after year. Something needs to be done. Maybe. Or you could say, look, I know it was an up and down year, but I will tell you this. I do know this was a very confident group. This was a group that felt like this thing is headed in the right direction. I remember after the second West Coast road trip, and the Bucks did not have very good West Coast trips this year. But I remember shortly after that, that was the message. that they felt like, let everyone talk. We know what we're doing is working. We know it's working better, I should say. The defense was certainly better. Maybe it wasn't quite to the levels that we saw those first 10 or so games under Doc Rivers, but by and large, the defense was better since that change. Was it good enough? That's an entirely different conversation. Injuries were a part of it, but I do know this team felt very confident and liked where they were headed and liked playing for Doc Rivers. So in that sense, I don't think this is a knee-jerk, well, we got to blow it up. We know these guys are untouchable. Everything else is up for grabs. There is going to be change. I think we all know that much. But this isn't going to be last year, where there's certainly not going to be a coaching change. And there's not going to be the home run swing, whether that's good or bad. You know, there is no Damian Lillard here. Free agents, we can take a look at who's out there. It's not much. You know, this is not a good draft class. It's also not a good free agent class, but it never is. You know, that's where this league is headed now. Not headed. That's where this league is gone. You don't make changes through free agency. You do it through trades. Guys don't hit the market anymore. Paul George is the best free agent. I think the assumption is he's going to one of two teams. He's staying with the Clippers or he's going to the 76ers. The other names that you would look at, they're role players, and that's what the Bucks need. But there's not really the young guys that we're talking about, right? What do you need? You need a shooting guard. It's not to say Malik Beasley is gone, but as I mentioned, you don't own any rights on Malik Beasley. He was on a one-year deal for the veterans minimum. You don't have bird rights on him. What bird rights means is you can go above the threshold to keep him. You're over the cap. So if you had bird rights, you could give him X amount of dollars, more than the veterans minimum, because you had those rights and he was already on your team. Bucks had that with P.J. Tucker. They opted not to use it. They had it with Bobby Portis in the past. They did use that. Same with Pat Connaughton, right? That's how the Bucks are able to keep signing these guys when they're so far over the cap. Don't have it with Malik Beasley. So if he came back, it would be a veterans minimum. The conversation is also, and we've seen this, we talk about the Bucks doing the same thing over and over. What do you expect? We've seen the same thing from Malik Beasley, too. He has a lot of value in the regular season. Things change in the postseason. And somebody asked me earlier in this series, too, can you explain what the difference is in the regular season and playoffs and why guys, Malik specifically, why guys can struggle to shoot in the postseason but not in the regular season? 82 versus 16. You hear that all the time. 82 player or a 16 player. In other words, you got to win 16 games to win a championship. So are you a guy that you can play 82 games, or are you a guy that matters in the postseason? What matters in the postseason is half court. Tough shot making. Are you a two-way player? Can you be played off the floor? Making tough shots, as we mentioned, but also, are you a guy that they're going to leave open? Because that's the biggest difference. You'll see guys hit a high rate whenever you ask, why did this guy shoot 31% in the playoffs when he was a 48% shooter in the regular season? And unfortunately, the Bucks have had a lot of those guys of late. We saw it from Malik this year. Malik had 2 good games for you, but especially with no Giannis and 2 games without Damian Lillard, you needed 6 good games from Malik Beasley. Malik, we saw it with Grayson Allen. Saw it with George Hill. We saw it with Niko Mirotic. Mirza Teletovic way back when. Up and down the list. Because guys will leave you open in the regular season. Maybe you're catching a team on night 2 of a back-to-back, where it's their 3rd game in 5 nights. Or they didn't have the scout on you. Or they just don't care. Or they're undermanned themselves. You can see those numbers inflate in the regular season. It's why we keep saying, man, the playoffs are such a different animal. You're not being left open in the playoffs. And then when you are, that's when it becomes mental. And it starts to get to you of, wait a minute, what? Why are they leaving me open here? Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. You know, I don't know that it was entirely by design tonight. But there's one T.J. McConnell had a wide open look. Knocked it down. Obi Toppin had some open looks. I don't have to remind you about Grant Williams 2 years ago. So that's the big difference. Is Damian Lillard is that guy. You have that guy that you know can hit those shots. And I think what you saw from Damian Lillard in these 4 postseason games that he played in, you got what you were expecting on his end. He held up his end of the bargain. 35 at the half in game 1, 35 for the game, but I thought he played within the game in the second half. 34 in game 2. What he did tonight, where he was clearly hobbled. He was not 100%. You could tell that from the jump. But what you saw from Dame was everything as advertised, as up and down, and there's a number of reasons why, as we touched on, as up and down as he was in the regular season, what he gave you tonight and what he gave you in these 4 games he played in this series, that was everything you expected to get. So how do you fill things out around him, around Giannis, around Chris Middleton? Those are the 3 that I think we know are here. The rest, who knows? It's not to say all of those guys that we did not mention are gone, but no team ever stays the same year over year. There's always change. That's the tough part for these guys, is every time your season comes to an end, you know that final game tonight, that is the last time that group will have played together. So there's going to be change. Is it too much to expect that Andre Jackson Jr. and A.J. Green are huge pieces of the team next year? I think that's what remains to be seen. Does one of those 2 starts alongside those other 3 guys? Is the other your 6th man and getting heavy minutes? Who knows? But you need to get more athletic. And that is not news to any Bucks fan. It's the same conversation we've had for 3 years. But it felt like the chickens really came home to roost in this playoff series when you were already up against it with no Giannis and Damian Lillard. And that's the other thing to not lose sight of. The playoffs are all about adjustments and matchups. And I started to make this point before. I thought Doc Rivers was fantastic in this series. What did you expect from him? Without Giannis, that you cannot overstate how much that changes things. Without Dame for 2 games. Doc Rivers can say he is the coach of the team. The only team in NBA history to win a playoff game without their 2 leading scorers. Doc Rivers, that's the guy. I thought Doc was great in this series. You can make a strong case. Doc Rivers outcoached Rick Carlisle. Do we have that conversation if the Bucks don't make a coaching change? I don't know. I have a strong feeling about it, but I don't know. Game 5, what Doc Rivers did, to me, that shouldn't get lost in this. How he had that team prepared. Game 4, for that matter, is to have that group regroup after Bobby Portis goes out. But Game 5, the adjustments that he made, switching everything, how that fixed and cured their transition defense, putting Brook Lopez on Nesmith, putting Chris Middleton on Miles Turner. And that, to me, was the biggest piece. He made the adjustment to say, let's switch everything, and let's do that in transition as well. And then from there, proactively saying, all right, we know the Pacers and Rick Carlisle are also going to make adjustments, so let's also make a change from this. And that's when you saw the wrinkle. Starting the second half with Brook on Nesmith and Chris Middleton on Miles Turner. So Doc Rivers was very, very good. As many strays as he'll catch, as much as we all love to clown on Doc Rivers and create new Doc memes, he was very good in this series. Doc Rivers is not the reason why the Bucks lost this series. The question about Doc playing young guys, again, should he have played Andre Jackson Jr. more in this series? Probably. I think we probably reached that point. Doc Rivers is not alone. He's not the only coach. Look at what the Sixers are doing. Nick Nurse is going to do the same thing. Every single coach in that spot. Bud did the same thing. Every coach is going to play vets over young guys in the playoffs. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight. Still 2 more on hold. As I mentioned, we will get to every single one of you if you choose to hold. We'll hear from Chad and Bob coming up momentarily. Also, some more texts to get to here. Actually, let's do this. Before we do, let's squeeze in one of those calls. He's been waiting a while. Chad in Madison, you're up next.
Hey, thanks for taking my call.
Yeah, go ahead, Chad.
Hey, sorry about that. No, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Doc did everything he could with what he was up against. But look at, you mentioned earlier, take Jokic and Murray out of Denver, take, Embiid and Maxey out of Philadelphia, and what are those guys, what are those coaches doing? I think the biggest factor was our bench tonight looked. And you have the statistics for bench points tonight.
It was 10 for the Bucks, but for all intents and purposes, it was 6. 4 of them came in garbage time.
And they had Indiana had 40.
They had 50, and they had 50 total and 41 from McConnell and Toppin.
Right. So you've got a kind of dinged up Dame and everybody's saying. And the other point I wanted to make too was everybody's talking Brook Lopez couldn't defend this and that. Last year he was one of the leading contenders for Defensive Player of the Year. And he's getting older, and I understand he can't defend a lot of these younger guys. That's a whole different scene if Giannis is in the middle.
Yep.
So I just think, we kind of pull back the reins a little bit. We got, I think, a really good coach, a really strong top 3, and then figure out here's the apple in the bucket is, do we continue for the next 3, 4, 5 years to keep Thaddeus on at a roster spot? I mean, that's a roster spot.
Well, he is a free agent this summer.
Yeah. And, again, that's a roster spot, and we don't have many roster spots. We're looking at the bench. We love his hoorah-rah, but for the next however long Giannis is going to be there, is that Bronny James and LeBron hey, we're 1 and 2, or do we just say, hey, it was a great run. We'll do your podcast and continue on, and if you can sign on to somebody else, that'd be awesome. But that's a roster spot.
I get your point, Chad, and look, it may be as simple as, is Giannis on the team? Who knows? I'm not saying that Giannis is saying, hey, part of me staying here is Thanasis. I'm sure that is a part of the discussions. I get your point, but it is the 15th spot on the roster. It would be one thing if Thanasis is playing heavy minutes for you, but are Mavs fans having the same conversations about their 15th man? And I get the nepotism angle, but are Mavericks fans saying the same thing about Marcus Morris being the 15th man? You look at some of these other guys that we're seeing tonight. Look at the game that's being played tonight in New York. Are we saying the same thing across the board with the 15th man of that team? Yeah. Are the Pacers saying the same thing about James Johnson, of how much longer are we going to have him on the roster? I know he's added this season, but that's the same role that Thanasis fills. So, look, it's not to say it's not worth having the conversation when you're talking about constructing the roster, but it is just the 15th spot.
That's very true. Very true. I just wanted to call in and throw out some props to both Doc and Brook Lopez. He was considered Defensive Player of the Year last year, and then now everybody's saying he can't cover anybody. Well, It's a little bit tougher covering everybody when Giannis isn't in the middle.
Well, when Giannis isn't in the middle, that's a big piece of it. Is we touched on what Obi Toppin and Pascal Siakam were able to do for Toppin tonight. Well, Toppin was effective throughout this series. Because look, the one thing he brought was burst, and that is where it really stood out. It wasn't so much Tyrese Halliburton. I think it's pretty clear he's still dealing with the hamstring issue and now working through back issues. But he was the guy that felt like he was playing at a totally different speed in the regular season. In these games, it was Obi Toppin and TJ McConnell. That was the ones that were just, man, they're light years quicker. Giannis not being out there changes all of that. It changes Brooks' help. It changes how effective you can defend their bigs, to that point that was made earlier. If you need more athletic bigs, I don't disagree, but you also anticipate to have Giannis, and that is an athletic big. Maybe we've reached the point, too, where, I know, and I've not been alone here, I know I've always been hesitant of, do you really want Giannis as your 5? That seems like a lot of wear and tear through the regular season. Maybe we've reached that point with where the league has headed, that's the type of guy you need at a 5. But I'm with you, and the two guys that I will defend until my dying breath are Chris Middleton and Brook Lopez, because of how valuable they have both been. And I think it's easy to pick on Brook and say he was at fault for this or this or this. No, Giannis is a big piece, and he needs help on the perimeter. And Drew Holiday, not having him there, that's also a big piece if you're asking Brook to clean up everything that's coming at him and still stay with his responsibility.
Right. No, I couldn't agree more. Hey, great season. I look forward to next fall. You guys do a great show.
Thanks for the call. We will talk to you next year. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight. Still some more calls chiming in. A couple of lengthy texts as well, so we'll carve out some time for that after this on Bucks Talk.
This is Bucks Talk, presented by Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
A Brewers Group outing is the best way to celebrate any special occasion. Birthday parties, anniversaries, or bachelor parties. You can count on the Brewers to host. Brewers account reps make your day at the ballpark a breeze. Plus, get set up with customizable tailgate spaces, seating blocks in your favorite spot at American Family Field, and much more. Start planning your group outing now at brewers.com/groups.
ESPN Wisconsin's Mark Tauscher here, and there's one thing I think everyone can agree on. Potholes stink. And this year's weather will make it one of the worst years yet. Well, Johnson & Sons Paving is ready to take on the challenge with a team that has over 2 decades of experience. When the potholes pop up in your asphalt, Johnson & Sons Paving can patch or replace the whole area. Book an appointment now at johnsonsonspaving.com. Get that appointment booked before May 31st, and you might even see Old T on the job site for a visit. Find full contest details at ESPNWisconsinContest.com.
You ever have one of those days when you just couldn't come up with the right answer? Well, I know one answer that pretty much solves all problems. Ice cream. Yeah, it's the answer to everything, right? And right now, at Quick Trip, our rich, creamy, straight from our dairy, Nature's Touch 1-gallon pails of ice cream are just $4.99. Yeah, now that's an answer worth digging into. Come on, be a problem solver. Bring home some fresh, delicious Nature's Touch ice cream, only from Quick Trip.
Big trucks can be intimidating. If you've been seriously injured in a truck crash, call Gruber Law Offices today. Trucking law can be extremely complicated. You don't want to take on the insurance company alone. Gruber Law Offices has the experience, the resources, and of course, the results. We know truck law. We know the rules and regulations. We know what it takes to win. Call Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
What do you get when you combine grilled-to-order deliciousness with only the finest Wisconsin cheeses? Cousin Sub's new Wisconsin cheese steaks, featuring either steak or chicken, bacon, cheddar cheese, sautéed onions, and their new Cheddar Supreme cheese sauce. It's a match made in dairy heaven. And the decadence doesn't stop there. Pair your Wisconsin cheesesteak with their new Orange Dream Shake. All are available for a limited time only. Order in store, online, or via the mobile app. Cousin Subs. We believe in better.
Welcome back to Bucks Talk.
Consecutive season. The Indiana Pacers take it 120-98. Haven't mentioned the final score much so far. But yeah, it is going to be another long offseason for the Bucks. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on Bucks Talk. Let's head back to the phones and head to Menasha. Talk with Bob, who's up next.
Yeah, Justin, thanks for taking my call, and thanks for hosting your post-game broadcasts all season long. Your optimism and your honesty are second to none. Thank you for being so polite, and thank you for being so giving us some information on trading situations and financial situations of the NBA. I certainly appreciate that, and your civility and your the way you don't badmouth anyone. You're positive, and I hope that wears off to all the listeners. Thank you so very much, and hopefully I'm around to listen to you next year. Thanks again, Justin.
Well, hopefully, thanks for the call as always, Bob. Hopefully we're all here next year. A couple of texts to get to here. This one was interesting. I noticed during Game 2, when Doc knew it was out of reach, he tried a bunch of different sets with his subs. And Rick Carlisle left his starters in, which was a big mistake for Rick. Unfortunately, Giannis and Dame didn't come back in time. Otherwise, I think we would have had the series with all the knowledge he picked up after Game 2's loss. Doc way outcoached Rick. Again, I think Doc Rivers was very good in this series. And the weird part about this was even without Giannis and Dame, you still felt like, I talked about this with a few people before Game 5. The weird thing is, it still feels like this Bucks team could very easily be up 3-1 in this series. And even talking with one of the Pacers writers, I'd mentioned before that game, before Game 5, would you say the Bucks outplayed the Pacers in Indy and still went 0-2 in those games? And he agreed. It just goes to show you how important talent is and having your best players on the floor is. I mean, look, it can sound like loser speak and crying over spilled milk. I do believe if the Bucks were healthy, they win this series. I do believe if the Bucks were healthy, they win the semifinal series against the Celtics 2 years ago. Last year's the one that I don't know. I don't know if you could talk me into that. I get Giannis went out in Game 1 early, didn't play in Game 2, didn't play in Game 3. I don't know. That was a different beast in the Miami Heat. And case in point, evidence of that, we saw the Heat go all the way to the conference final, to the NBA finals, I beg your pardon. So that's the one I don't know. But I do believe the Bucks win this series if they're healthy. And that was, something that you knew was possible, especially when we dug up those quotes from Malik Beasley back from, I think it was January 3rd or January 4th, 5th, somewhere after that. Just after the Bucks played the Pacers for the 5th time this season and lost. And Malik Beasley said, yeah, we're going to see them in the playoffs, and it's not going to be pretty for them. Well, you knew there was a chance you would have to answer that. But, look, there's no way of ultimately answering that. We can believe it. We can say, hey, it'll be different next year. It might. But that's the unfortunate part about the postseason is it's all about adjustments. It's all about the series. What do you gain throughout the course of the series? What do you pick up on? What are the changes you make? Where do you find those edges and those margins? But how healthy are you? The Bucks just were not healthy. I don't want to spend too much time on, hey, if the Bucks were healthy, they win the series. Like I said, I think that is the case, but I don't want to spend too much time on it because it is just disrespectful to, number one, the guys that are out there for the Bucks and to the Indiana Pacers. I know it's easy to hate on the Pacers. They certainly did not make things easy in terms of taking a loss with grace. But we remember what that was like. Granted, the Bucks' drought was longer, but the Pacers had not won a first-round series since 2014. Do you remember 2019, what that felt like? And granted, you were the 1 seed going against an 8 seed when the playoff format was different. There was no play-in tournament, and that was back when especially in the East. 7 seed, the 8 seed, they were bad. It was really just 4-5 was typically the only competitive series you would see. Everything else was a sweep or a gentleman's sweep. But it's hard to criticize a group for being excited and celebrating a win in the playoffs when they haven't experienced it yet, and especially a fan base that's gone a decade without having that feeling. Remember what it felt like in 2019 when the Bucks finally got out of the first round. And going into that season, the thought was, when you hired Bud, all right, I feel like we are going to be a top 4 seed. Hey, the Bucks are going to have home court advantage in a first-round series. Well, they were the 1 seed. They blew out the Pistons, and that was, even entering that series, I still remember the feeling of, we're going to win. We're the 1 seed, The 1 seed doesn't lose in the first round. Little did we know that would change, 4 or 5 years later. The 1 seed doesn't lose. I know it's happened before. It's not very common. But you're going to win, but there's still that anxiety and that uncertainty because you had gone over. It was 2001 was the last time the Bucks got out of the first round until 2019. Not quite as long, but that's basically where the Pacers have been. So it's hard to try to shoot that down, especially when you're a team that has the history that the Bucks have, which was very, very good throughout the 80s. If you're old enough to remember that era of Bucks basketball, you can quickly point to, hey, this is great. I know they won a championship. Let's also not lose sight of what they did in the 80s, late 70s into the 80s, really, 91 when that ran out. But after 2001, it was pretty bleak, as a lot of you remember, hoping to make the playoffs, losing in the first round of the Miami Heat, losing in the first round of the eventual champion Detroit Pistons, losing in the first round to the then New Jersey Nets. The 2 years where you thought this is going to be the year. Losing in 6 to the Raptors. And I believe it was game 6 where you came back from 20 down and ultimately lost. 2018, which optimistically I thought that's what this season, this series was going to be. I said before it started, it reminds me of that. If you remember 2018, the Bucks in the first round, they were the 7th seed. That was when they entered the playoffs with Joe Prunty as their interim head coach after Jason Kidd had been fired in January. They were the 7th seed. They were playing the Boston Celtics as the 2 seed. It was a Celtics team that had Kyrie Irving, but he was injured and did not play in the playoffs. And the Celtics were the favorites, but not heavy favorites for a 2-7 matchup because you could see this Giannis kid was starting to become something. You had Chris Middleton. And it went 7 games. And the home team won all 7 games. And it just felt like Celtics were the better team. They had a big injury, but they were the better team. And the Bucks were young. They hadn't been through that yet. They just weren't ready. I thought maybe it was more hope that that's what this series was going to be. And ultimately it was not. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight on the season finale of Bucks Talk. Again, earlier than we had hoped for. No respect for Pacers fans chanting Milwaukee sucks at the end of the game. Bucks fans wouldn't do that. Obviously, the season is too long. Giannis is always going to be hurt, but the playoffs and Dame 2 by the playoffs and Dame 2. The Bucks couldn't wait to get rid of good players like Drew, despite how they were saying he was a valuable player. So it is talking out of both sides of his mouth. Which is it? Look, I mean, I'm not quite sure what the angle is or the point is you're making there. I mean, you have to trade something to get something. Drew was a very good player. Drew still is a very good player. So is Damian Lillard. You don't get Dame for free. The big takeaway is injuries. Injuries are going to be the story here for the offseason when we talk about another first-round exit and, 3 straight years where injuries really severely impacted how far you went. But it goes even further than that, as we mentioned. 2019? That first run with Mike Budenholzer, that was really the first year you were unimpacted by injuries. Giannis goes down in the bubble. That series, again, the 2 series I have a hard time saying injuries are the reason the Bucks lost are both against the Miami Heat. It just seemed like they were a better team in the bubble. And it seemed like they were a better team last year. Part of that was who saw Max Strus and Gabe Vincent and Caleb Martin doing what they did. Their role players had big series. And Jimmy Butler played like the best player in the league. Those are the 2 that I would point to and say, I'm not sure. Even if the Bucks are healthy, I'm not sure if they beat those teams. But every other one of those, you had Giannis miss time in the second round in 2020. You ultimately lost that series. You had the year you won the championship. Giannis missed 2 games. Dante DiVincenzo missed the final, I think, 20 games of the postseason run. The Chris Middleton one is the biggest what if, maybe the biggest what if in Bucks history in terms of on the court. Obviously, the bigger one is, hey, what if Kareem Abdul-Jabbar doesn't want to be traded? What if you take Joel Embiid instead of Jabari Parker? There's some big ones out there, but in terms of games, what if Chris Middleton stays healthy? I still believe that team beats the Celtics, reaches the finals. I think they beat that Warriors team. And now another year. Giannis does not play at all. 3 games that he's played in the last, 10 postseason games for the Bucks? That's a tough one. 11, 3 games in the last 11 postseason games. And even then, it's really 2. It's really game 4 and 5 last year against the Miami Heat. Think about that. You lost in the first round 2 years in a row, but Giannis played less than 10 minutes in game 1. He played game 4 and 5 last year. Did not play at all this year. That's the challenge for John Horst, though, is how much of this was injury and how much of it is we need to do some tinkering and retooling to this roster. 855-616-1620, the number to join us tonight. Let's take one more call here. Jay in Oak Creek, you're up next.
Hello?
Yeah, go ahead, Jay.
My question to you is, if the Bucks are going to do anything next year, they got to be better defensively, and we know that. I hope you will talk a little bit on it, but I got one question for you. Would the Bucks have been better by keeping Holiday instead of trading for Lillard?
I don't think the result in this series changes. Do you?
Well, they would have been better defensively with Holiday.
Sure, but they would not have been better offensively.
That's true. But they would have been better defensively throughout the whole year, which might have gotten them a better seed, maybe a 2 seed instead of the 3.
Maybe. But then, if we're to assume that everything happens as it does, and let's say Giannis still goes down in that game against the Celtics, and you don't have Giannis in that series, then we're talking about playing the 76ers in the first round as a 2 seed with no Giannis and with no Dame because you have Drew Holiday. So you feel okay about your defense, good about your defense, but again, we saw it year after year, and it's not a knock on Drew Holiday, but where are you going to get the scoring from? And especially in the half court. You're going to have to try to win games 90 to 88.
I get what you're saying now, but I was just thinking the Bucks hurt themselves a lot this last half of the year because of their defense.
I don't disagree with that, and the defense was clearly not good enough. I think when the trade was made before the season, my hope and goal was, if you can finish somewhere around 12th, 13th defensively. We heard from Doc Rivers after the game tonight saying he thinks, and for the most part this is true, he thinks you have to be in the top 10 offense and defense to be a serious title contending team. This team was clearly not in the top 10 defensively. But my hope was, can you finish somewhere just better than league average, right? Better than 15th, somewhere close to the top 10. Can you hover around there? We saw it for periods of time under Doc Rivers. They ended up finishing 6th offensively. I know everybody's going to point to, hey, they were in the top, 2 or 3 before the coaching change was made. Where were they defensively? And defensively, this for the season as a whole. This isn't just Doc. Finished 6th on offense, 15th. 15th. 15th would be great. They finished 19th on defense. That number has to improve. We can point to Denver. The Nuggets won a championship last season with, I think, the 15th rated defense in the league. What does not get mentioned when we point out those numbers was the defense got better in the second half of the season, and especially in the playoffs. It was a good defense. So maybe there is something of, hey, if you're elite on one end, as long as you're a little better than league average, you'll be fine. That's going to be the goal for the Bucks, is how do we crack the top 10 once again defensively? What adjustments need to be made? Because this series, to me, showed you the challenge of it is you're going to be another year older, but this series showed you, look, it works. In the playoffs, in the half court, it works. Damian Lillard, Chris Middleton, and we would assume Giannis, when you think about him as the roll man to the rim, having 2 shooters out there around him, and Chris and Damian Lillard. So I think we saw enough to know that part works. But how do we fill in those gaps defensively? Because we gave you those season-long numbers. Under Doc, they were 15th in defense, but they were 18th on offense. And again, you have to add the caveat, Chris Middleton didn't play in 16 of those games. Brook Lopez didn't play in a handful. Dame didn't play in a handful. Giannis didn't play in the last 4 or 5, and then some prior to that. So there is some that goes into that. But that's the big thing, is how do you improve the defense? Because I think you can live with the offense being okay, right? Being 10th, 9th, somewhere around there, even with Giannis and Dame. But you need that defense to be more consistent, and they just didn't have that all season long. Does that mean getting rid of Brook Lopez? I mean, maybe that's what the Bucks choose to do. I'm not going to say, yeah, that's task number 1 is getting rid of Brook Lopez. He is still a very valuable piece. But, he's not Rudy Gobert. And again, all players are different. So this isn't a better than, it's different than. Rudy Gobert is younger. He is more agile and athletic. He can play on the perimeter. I'm guilty of this too. We all laughed at that trade the Timberwolves made. It's becoming pretty clear Rudy Gobert was hampered by the knee issues last year. He looks much different this year. But Brook Lopez, even after back surgery, was still incredibly effective. Nearly won Defensive Player of the Year a season ago with help on the perimeter. So improving the defense is goal number 1. Maybe goal number 2, however you choose to view it. Getting more athleticism. But I think the checklist that you would make is you need to get more athletic. It's easy to say you need to get younger. Again, that's how do you strike that balance? I don't dispute you need to get younger. You don't want to keep accumulating players that are in their mid-30s and stay the oldest team in the league, because that has a shelf life. But you're not just going to turn the roster into a half-and-half experiment. So you're going to have a veteran-laden group. How do you sprinkle in youth around it? But athleticism and playmaking, those are the two big things this team needs. Also remember, no Dame would also mean no Pat Beverly trade. Pat Beverly's going to be interesting as well because of his connection to Doc Rivers. I think Pat Beverly was very valuable for this team. But just as we mentioned with that age discussion, right? It's an older group. Pat Beverly is an older player. So 35 years old. He's going to turn 36 this summer. Same age as Brooke Lopez. There's a lot of questions that the Bucks are facing, but it's not quite as easy as saying you got to get younger. You would love to get younger, but I don't know how likely or how possible it is. Look, if you're getting younger, you're probably taking a step backwards, is the reality here. One text that I do want to get to before we wrap up here, because you spent a lot of time to write it, so let's settle in to read this one. Since the Bucks decided to part ways with Coach Bud, they are always going to be content with being eliminated from the playoffs if they get that far. Since Costello, he was the only one that got them a championship. Larry Costello, he's speaking of, and all of the injury-prone has-beens that are all the Bucks want are never going to make the team respectable either. And what was all this talk about the Bucks having playoff experience? What good is it when they forget how to use it to their advantage? With the Pacers, like most teams, having our number during the regular season, you just knew who really was going to win the series. Everyone, no matter who got stuck playing the Bucks. So hopefully Horst will get smart and get players that actually want to and know how to play and are not hurt 99% of the year. Wow. 99% of the year. But we all know that will never happen, so I guess that we are going to have to be content and settle for being ousted in round one forever on the rare occasion that we actually make it to the playoffs. Good job all season. Thanks. Sorry to be a Debbie Downer, but just stating the obvious, and was sort of happy to hear that Dame was back the way they said he was going to help give us a chance. But alas, maybe some year. Wow. What is this, 8 straight years, I think, that they made the playoffs, which, again, I'm not old enough to have experienced the 80s run. I was alive for it, but, I mean, I was born in the 80s. I heard about it from my uncles and other people around me and my family that followed that and would quickly remind you how good the Bucks were and should, frankly, because it still remains a piece of team history that I don't think gets enough mention. If you're around for it, you obviously know about it, and you are quick to point it out. But, you know, especially in the 90s and early 2000s, we would hear about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and Oscar Robertson. That was it. I do think with the ownership change, when this group bought from Senator Herb Kohl, one of the big things that we started to see come to light much more is recognizing the team's history. And I do think that's very important. Getting those recognition. We know about Marcus Johnson, but seeing more of those names. Sidney Moncrief, Brian Winters, Paul Pressey, right? Terry Cummings, all those guys that were a part of those teams in that decade. Don Nelson, getting that attention, getting that respect. But it's easy to point to all that and take that mentality when, again, most of the Bucks basketball I remember before I started doing this and being fortunate enough to work for the team that I grew up rooting for as a kid, most of that experience was not good. I remember forcing my parents, dragging them to take me to the Bradley Center so I could watch Blue Edwards and Jay Humphreys and Eric Murdoch and Eric Mobley. Who could forget Todd Day and Marty Conlin? You went, either you were a glutton for punishment, you loved basketball, or you went to see the opposing team. Like, that was Bucks basketball when I was a kid in the 90s, in the early 2000s. And there was just this sentiment where you resigned yourself to the fact of, well, at least we got a pro team. At least it keeps Milwaukee on the map. We're never going to win, but at least we have this team. And it's why I don't want people to lose sight of how far this team has come. It's disappointing. I'm not going to try to spin losing in the first round 2 straight years as a good thing. And a moral victory. Hey, the Bucks hung tough. But I wouldn't even say you're in the golden age of Bucks basketball. You're in one of them. They won a championship. They played in 2 finals in a span of, 4 years in the early 70s? 71 and 74. I mean, what you're going to hear mentioned quite a bit is what we talked about before. Hey, you know how many games Giannis has played in the playoffs the last 2 years? It's also a team that in this 8-year run, I talked about making the playoffs 8 straight years. And I would, for 6 of those, you had Giannis like prime Giannis. They got out of the second round twice in those 8 years. One of them, you were fortunate enough to get a championship. The other, you made the conference finals. You lost. I remember it to this day, how disappointing that was. Because we all thought the Bucks were going to win the championship that year, or at least get to the finals, I should say. You still had to contend with the Golden State Warriors. Nobody could have predicted that Klay Thompson's knee was going to blow up and Kevin Durant was going to do what you feared, man. I hope we don't see this from Giannis or Dame. No one could have projected that. But just the sheer notion that not only did the Bucks get out of the first round, they reached the conference finals and were up 2-0, where you started to feel like, all right, wow, they're actually really good. And they're building something here. Like this, we lost in the conference finals this year, but we'll be back next year. And that's the danger of what we even went through before. I said I hesitate to say as much of this as I did because of that. Things like that. And it's not just basketball. The Packers won a Super Bowl in 96. They got there again in the same year. 97, sorry. 96 season. They got there again the same year. This is a budding dynasty. They lost. They win with Aaron Rodgers in 2011. They don't get close. They get to the NFC Championships games, and we all remember how those unfolded. Do we have the same conversation about the Bucks? I don't know, maybe. But I don't want this to be at least, but in some ways, yes. I mean, you would love to have more, but who could have thought 10 years ago, in 2011, 10 years from when they won the title, I would tell you the Bucks are going to win a championship. Who would have thought that after 2013 when they won 15 games? And I think that's what makes it extra frustrating is for the longest time, you never thought you could be at that level, that this was a league that was not inclusive. It was a superstar-driven league. There are only really 3 to 4 seats at the table, and the Bucks did not have one of them. You know, the Bucks were the guy that was waiting outside to get in the club and goes to the bouncer and is told your name is not on the list. You don't have Michael Jordan. You don't have Hakeem Olajuwon. You don't have David Robinson. You don't have Shaq. You don't have Kobe Bryant. Sorry, keep moving. But they have been on that list for 6 years now. And it's all about how you choose to view it. If you're a pessimist or if you're an optimist. You got one title, and I will never forget that. And I'm sure everyone listening, you will never forget that. The experience that it was outside of Fiserv Forum. I still remember the post-game show that we did after Game 6 in Atlanta. And it was me and Greg Matzik doing those shows together that year. And I just that whole finish to the game, taking the podium and seeing the smiles on all those players' faces and turning that whole post-game show into, because again, we kind of thought Giannis would not play in the finals. So turning the whole thing into, I don't want to sound like a defeatist here, but I don't know if they're going to beat the Suns. I don't know if they're going to win in the finals, but hey, at least they got there. Can you believe it? Holy cow, the Bucks got to the NBA Finals. In that whole playoff run, I mentioned doing those pep rallies and doing that before Game 4 and sharing the news to the crowd of, hey, Trae Young isn't playing, and thinking, wow, they're going to win. They're up 3-1. I will never forget that experience in the finals. I was fortunate enough to be on that stage with Marcus Johnson before Game 6, where we addressed the fans that were out there on that stage that the Bucks had set up preemptively, knowing we're going to win this game. So we're already setting up our parade and our celebration stage. Being out there with Marcus Johnson and his sons on that stage, and there must have been 15 to 20,000 Bucks fans already outside the arena that, to be clear, were there for the game and Marcus Johnson. But just seeing that and thinking, holy cow, I remember when the Bradley Center, and granted it has to do with the players that were on the floor, would struggle to get this many people for 2 games. And here they are waiting outside the arena to celebrate this. So you take the good with the bad, and you remember how special that was. But most importantly, I hope you remember how difficult and how hard that was to achieve. This is frustrating, but there are 29 teams that I don't know if I would say are unhappy when you think about perspective and expectations and what your goals are. But there's only one team that's truly happy and gets to achieve their goal because of those 3 things that you need: health, luck, and skill, or talent. When they come together, it's unstoppable. When just one of those pieces is off, it's very difficult to overcome. And unfortunately for the Bucks, it's been 3 straight seasons that one of those pieces is off. I said we could relitigate that trade. And I think we still need some more time to process it, the Drew Holiday and Damian Lillard trade. But, look, just as we said, it's 3 straight seasons that you're mentioning injuries. That can you keep saying it's the same thing over and over again? That's where the Bucks were. That's why they made that trade for Damian Lillard. Because it was year after year. You won a championship with Drew Holiday. He was fantastic. But it was year after year of our offense isn't good enough. Comes up short in the half court. We got to do something different here. And I don't know how much longer you could keep that going. So that was the spot the Bucks were in. I don't think it ends any differently. Again, there's no way of us really knowing the answer of what if Giannis plays. I believe in my heart of hearts the Bucks win this series if Giannis is healthy and plays in this series. I think they probably run into the same results if there's no Giannis and you didn't make that trade for Damian Lillard. Because you'd still run into the issue where you're more equipped to slow down the Pacers, but as we saw, it wasn't just one piece. It wasn't just containing Tyrese Halliburton. It was TJ McConnell. It was Obi Toppin. For moments, it was Miles Turner. It was Pascal Siakam. The Pacers really exhausted all of their resources. They got that productivity. They got that production up and down the roster that the Bucks just never got. So I do think you would have been in the same spot. You would have been in a better spot defensively. You would not have been there offensively. If there was a way to bottle health, that's what the Bucks need to trade for this offseason. There is, as I was reminded by a frequent listener of the show, there is one other doomsday scenario, which I suppose we can take a look at and start to wrap up our final edition this season of Bucks Talk. We'll do that after this.
This is Bucks Talk, presented by Gruber Law Offices. One call, that's all.
Hey, this is Brad Nortman from KBN. Tune in to Kyle Brust and Nortman every day from 2 to 5. WKTI and WKTI HD Milwaukee.
A locally owned Good Karma brand station.
From big tailgate parties to cozy dinners for two, the freshest ideas start with a stop at Century Foods. Now through Wednesday, save on 8.8 to 12-ounce selected varieties Kellogg's Kids cereal, 2 for $6. 6 to 24-ounce selected varieties Frito-Lay party-sized chips or dips, 2 for $9. 12-pack cans selected varieties Super Chill Soda, $4.49. 64-ounce selected varieties Old Orchard Juice, 2 for $5.
Hey, why'd you throw my glass across the room?
I have to keep practicing.
The vase from Aunt Sophie?
I'm warming up in case I get to take them out at American Family Field. Read this.
Win the ultimate baseball fan experience at Century Foods?
You either get to throw out the first pitch, hold the finish line for the famous racing sausages, or be on the field during batting practice. My new TV!
Just doing a little batting practice of my own.
The ultimate baseball fan experience. Return the entry form found in the weekly ad to any Century by July 24th.
Spring fishing is finally here, and Fleet Farm has everything you need to reel in more fish this year. Upgrade your gear with the best brands like Rapala, Berkeley, and St. Croix. Find exclusive flicker sheds you won't find anywhere else, starting at $12.99. Get rod and reel combos starting at only $24.99. And shop our wide selection of fishing line that starts at just $4.99. Land top fishing gear and everything else you need for everyday life at Fleet Farm.
Hey, Drew Scott here, and I'm Jonathan Scott, reminding you that life's better with a home policy from American Family Insurance. They can help you get just the right protection at just the right price and help you save when you bundle home and auto. Kind of like Goldilocks and the Three Bears. It'll be just right for you. We love a custom build. American Family Insurance. Insure carefully, dream fearlessly. Get a quote and find an agent at amfam.com.
Products not available in every state. Visit amfam.com to learn how discounts may apply to you. American Family Mutual Insurance Company SI and its operating company, 6000 American Parkway, Madison, Wisconsin.
For some children, a single surgery can turn an untreated cleft into a smile for life. But at Smile Train, we understand that most children need a little extra care. They need medical, dental, and emotional resources to grow healthy and strong, to express themselves clearly, and to navigate all of life's challenges so that their smiles light up the room as brightly as possible. Visit smiletrain.org to learn how Smile Train is supporting the cleft community with lifelong smiles.
Welcome back to Bucks Talk.
The season comes to an end. They go out in the first round 2 years in a row. This offseason should be interesting with signings and the future expectation of a possible 25 or 26 expansion draft. Teams will change depending on how many protections teams will be allowed. I think the expansion draft. So we assume expansion is coming. It seems like it's going to be Vegas and Seattle. I think it would be later than 26. But it is something to file away. It's going to be an interesting offseason once again. And I mentioned the doomsday scenario is maybe our most loyal listener, right up there with Dick in Port Washington, with Justin in North Carolina, Bob in Menasha, a number of you that I'm leaving off of this list. But maybe the most ardent listener of Bucks Talk chimes in, who will remain unnamed at his preference, but says the doomsday scenario has not been avoided just yet. The doomsday scenario is, what if Giannis suffers an Achilles injury playing for Greece in the Olympics this summer? I'm going to be very curious to see that for two players, Giannis and Joel Embiid, what their status is. By the way, the 76ers eliminated by the New York Knicks. The extender was officiating that game. We saw it in Milwaukee on, what night is it, Thursday? We saw it on Tuesday night with, well, you know who, officiating the game. He was calling the game tonight between the Knicks and the Sixers, so you wondered if that would go 7 games, but it does not. And that's, look, the other thing to point out is what I was trying to make the point and then fell short, was you are going to hear people tell you the Bucks did not do enough to maximize Giannis's window. that this is 2 straight first-round losses, that they've left the second round of the playoffs, got past the second round of the playoffs just twice. With Giannis, period. But just 2 times in that window of peak Giannis, starting in 2019. That is true. But what I would point to is 2 times they did not. 2 times they moved further. Once in the conference finals, once with a championship. Because Joel Embiid has still yet to get out of the second round of the playoffs. We were having essentially the same conversation about the Denver Nuggets until last year. They were that plucky team that, hey, looks like they're building something here. They finally broke through and won the title last year. It's not that easy. You need those 3 things. You need health, you need skill, you need luck. When you don't get all of them, things get interesting. So, look, I would encourage you to avoid probably a lot of the national media perspective the next couple of days. It's not going to be kind to the Bucks. And frankly, I suppose you probably won't hear as much. I think most of the beating up will be reserved for the 76ers because the Bucks had already started to become an afterthought with the way that their regular season was. Dick has been adamant that he thinks the Bucks are going to be one of the favorites next season. I don't think that's a bad thing. I think 2 straight first-round exits, unless there's some home run swing that I'm unaware of, I don't think the Bucks are going to be one of those heavy favorites. The Oklahoma City Thunder will. The Denver Nuggets will continue to be. The Boston Celtics are going to be a favorite. The way their roster is shaped. The Minnesota Timberwolves are going to be a favorite. The Bucks are not going to be in that conversation. But again, that's probably not a bad thing. The feeling is different this year because last year you knew a lot is going to change. You don't just lose in the first round and keep the status quo. Did we expect that to mean Drew Holiday leaving for Dame Lillard? No. You got the strong sense there could be a coaching change, and you knew personnel decisions were going to be made. But not just the fact that you're paying multiple head coaches. I do think the big piece of this is we feel settled at head coach. We had some things we saw from Doc Rivers that we liked. We just didn't have enough time. Now you got a lot of time for 2 off seasons in a row. The other thing not to lose sight of is it's been a weird run of years, couple of years here. When you think back to the restart in the bubble, being eliminated by the Heat, I believe that series ended right before Labor Day. And then getting 2 months off, starting the new season that began in December, 2 months before training camp, starting the new season that began in December, extending all the way into July. You win a championship. 2 days later, Drew Holiday, Chris Middleton get on a plane, go to Tokyo, play in the Olympics. They come back. You get a month off. Then you start another season. Then you go on another playoff run into the second round. That's when Chris Middleton suffers his injury, gets some other work done. Brooke Lopez, same thing. It's been a lot of basketball for all these guys. And we said last year, hey, maybe, 5 months off might not be a bad thing. Well, I guess maybe 2 straight years of 5 months off might not be a bad thing. But I don't expect wholesale changes. Every team looks different every single year. So there are going to be some changes. There are going to be some differences. And we'll start to get a glimpse at that on draft night, which I believe is, remember when the Bucks were playing close to the draft starting? The draft, I believe, is the 27th of June. So once we get there, and then July 1 is free agency day, that's when we'll get a better sense of just how dramatic those changes are going to be for this Bucks team. I said it would potentially be a marathon tonight, as it typically has been whenever the season comes to an end. So I hope it was fruitful for you guys and you got everything out that you needed to, because I don't know when we'll reconvene here. I'm going to suggest we do a draft show, especially since the Bucks have a first-round pick. There could be some notable trades and moves that happen then, so I'm going to try to plant that bug in the ear of the powers that be and a free agency show, or if we just combine the two, because this figures to be a very interesting offseason once again for the Bucks. But we don't know. We don't know what anything's going to look like until August. Mid-August is typically when we get the NBA schedule, and that's when we know when the first regular season game is. And preseason, for that matter. But that's when we start to get a feel of what this team will look like. Will they be playing on Christmas Day again after back-to-back first-round exits? I have to assume yes, as long as you have Giannis and Damian Lillard. But a lot of uncertainty. So we are heading into 3 months of that. A month where you get to catch your breath and collect things and get ready for the draft and free agency, and then another pause. So look, I do want to say this before we wrap. It is always tough to close it out. It's always weird, too, when you get to the playoffs and you don't know when your last show and your last game is going to be. But it has been my privilege to be able to do this once again this season and interact with all of you, the same names that we see over and over and hear from frequently on these shows. I do appreciate everybody that chimes in and interacts with us and chooses to spend a part of their night or afternoon or day with us on these shows. So that is not lost on me. I do appreciate all of that. It makes this very fun. I mean, loving basketball does as well. But it is one of the best parts of my day to get to watch this team, be around this team, and then do this show. All the people that I listed as well that I work with and that we all work with, that are a part of this show, that help this show get off the ground and to have some say in it as well. Max Meyerson, who's on the board tonight. Now our attention pivots to Cleveland. Max, guys are still alive later than the Bucks.
It's if you would have told me that before the season, I wouldn't have believed you. But they're still alive. They got a chance to move on the second round and then get spanked by Boston. So that's always fun.
Well, look, we saw this is now 23 days and counting that we saw it set Giannis back. So I got to assume you're not going to see Kristaps Porzingis in that series.
Listen, if I thought Kristaps Porzingis was the difference between the Celtics beating the Cavs and not, I'd be really happy. But, it gives them a chance. But they still got to get through Orlando first. So let's not jump ahead.
So do you guys win tomorrow?
Oh, God, no. I've already decided it's Game 7 in Cleveland, and it's going to be one hell of an atmosphere, and I think it'll be a fun game, and we'll see if they pull it out. But the home teams won every game in that series, so I don't see that changing.
Well, I think the challenge for Bucks fans, if you choose to stick with the playoffs now, is who do we throw our support to? I would assume it's probably going to be a Western Conference team. It seems like maybe the Timberwolves, and there's some kinship there with them, the Oklahoma City Thunder perhaps. But I will say this, in terms of Eastern Conference teams, I think you'd probably throw more support to the Cavs, even though they're a divisional team, just because of the hatred for the Pacers. I would assume Bucks fans also dislike the Knicks.
Who doesn't dislike them?
So it's I don't really care who wins that series, but I'd prefer it not be the Pacers. And then, of course, the Cavs have the benefit of playing the other team or one of the other teams that Bucks fans hate. So you may have a lot of support in the Milwaukee area for your Cleveland Cavaliers.
Let's go. Midwest small market teams. Let's get it done.
Keep it alive. Look, the other thing I'll shamelessly promote here, too, if you want to stay connected, Locked on Bucks every single day, myself and Camille Davis, Frank Madden, a number of others that join us on the show. So we're still pumping those out every single day. If you want your basketball and Bucks fix, that stays on a daily cadence until we get into the offseason. So you can find me there as well. Season comes to an end, so now we'll wait to see when this schedule comes out and if and when we will reconvene for this show once again. My thanks to everybody for tuning in tonight and all throughout the season, to Max, to everybody else that has worked on this show and helped bring it to you and get it off the ground each and every year. We will catch up once again next season with Bucks Talk.
Discover the difference at Fine